This is the Monrovia, California National Headquarters for the National Health Federation, which has chapters in most states. Meet the President and his Executive Committee in one of their regular monthly sessions.
I am Charles Creselius, President of the National Health Federation and Chairman of the Executive Committee. I have been concerned for many years about the denial of freedom of choice in health matters, with freedoms in this area being denied the American people one by one. It was exciting for me to learn that there was an organization set up to protect the consumer and guarantee his rights. It is a great cause and one I am dedicated to completely.
Every foot of the building buzzes with activity, 5 days a week and often overtime as membership grows. The mailing room is a vital center of the Federation's activities, in addition to mailing the bulletin and keeping files current. They also maintain a reprint service consisting of hundreds of reprints to meet the demand for more literature. Members are kept abreast of the Federation's activities as well as current proposed legislation through the bulletin. This is Ray Hauser, the able and dedicated editor. One of the regular features of the bulletin is the Washington Report, contributed by Mr. Clinton Miller, the Federation's registered lobbyist, direct from the Capitol. In July 1969, an alert member from the Globe, Arizona area mailed the Federation a newspaper clipping. It reported the aerial spraying of herbicides by the United States Forest Service of thousands of acres of watershed for the purpose of killing chaparral, a wild desert bush. After 4 days of such intensive spraying, which had been going on intermittently for 12 years, many of the plants, trees, and animals died or were deformed. Irate citizens also claimed that their water supplies had been contaminated. Mrs. Billy Shoecraft, a resident and landowner bordering the government-owned Tonto National Forest shown here, is one of the human victims. She has been the leading spokesman for other residents of Globe, many of whom have also been harmed. The National Health Federation maintains a reference library of research and scientific material. Their qualified personnel renders service in cases where health freedoms are in jeopardy. A congressional investigation of the Globe, Arizona spraying resulted after the National Health Federation publicized a 7-point indictment of the Forest Service. It was headed by New York Congressman McCarthy in Globe. Shortly afterward, Senator Hart from Michigan conducted hearings in the Capitol. Vitally important information about herbicides, formerly kept secret, was revealed. The National Health Federation has also assisted Mrs. Shoecraft in filing lawsuits against the United States Department of Agriculture, 4 chemical manufacturers, and a water users association. Ralph Nader's attorneys have filed similar suits to discontinue such herbicides. Here, Billy Shoecraft explains in her own words what happened after the spraying. Truly another silent spring.
This first picture is of the 2 of the guinea pigs. The one with the small pink eye, one of the albinos, shows the same deformity that was noted in the test animals in Washington. In fact, they said over 50% of the deformities which they attributed to the herbicides 2,4-D and 2,4,5-T were what is known as microphthalmia, or the tiny eyes. The one on the right side of the picture has the bulged eyes, enlarged eyes. Both of them were suffering from loss of hair in addition to that. 2 more of the guinea pigs suffering from malformed heads. This little guinea pig here had no eyes at all. This picture shows the very enlarged eye on the right side, and the one on his left was very tiny. This is of one more of the little guinea pigs. As you can see, it has an eye socket, but within the eye socket there was no eyeball. Then this is one of the pigeons. This particular one, as you can see, it had the deformities in its legs and in its wings. It was never able to fly. This shows the loss of the feathers that would not even grow in. It was also deformed. These pictures cover an area now that we're looking at, which belonged to Mr. McCusick, and it shows the entrance to his home and some of the defoliated trees. He is holding what is called a seabright chicken. This is one of the fowl that were paralyzed in the area, but this particular little seabright chicken was paralyzed. It lived by the giving it cambiotics for about 2 months after the spray before the little thing died. These are the goats that Mr. McKusick raised. He has been raising goats for approximately 16 years, and in the past 5 years, over 60% of his goats have been either deformed, born deformed, or they have died at birth. This one, as you can see, was one of the deformed goats. Since the time of this picture taking, he has had several goats born with double lips, and these goats could not nurse. This shows a picture of a close-up of some of the trees that were defoliated. The leaves from this particular tree are some of those that the various little birds and the chickens in the area had eaten, and they died from the leaves a year later. This shows part of the private land going towards the mountain, and the area was highly contaminated with these particular chemicals. Samples of the soil have been sent in and analyzed, and of the plant life, and it shows contamination in 1970. The samples from this garden were taken in 1970. I have corn from this garden showing no grains on the ears. The red things you're looking at, of course, are tomatoes. But this was all it grew. This was one vine, and it was the only thing that did produce, the only vine that produced any tomatoes. The eggplants were bright orange, as you can see in his hand. The peppers, he planted bell peppers, green bell peppers. He produced bright red ones. He produced black peppers. They were twisted, turned, and various and variegated colors. But they did not come out to be what he planted. That is a watermelon I am holding. This shows the activity of the acid on them, and I took some of these to Washington. He is 84 years old. His comment was, "They can't do anything worse to me than they have done, for they have made my place so I cannot grow anything." He lost all of these trees that you see now that are still standing there green with no fruit. They are now dead. This year he does not even have the grass in his yard that you can see in this picture. These flowers died. His grass and his flowers have not come back. This is my own home at the foothills of these mountains. I was standing outside my bedroom door the morning that it went over, and the spray came down directly on me. I was sprayed with it 2 more times as I tried to attract their attention and get them stopped. These are grapes that were sent in and shown to contain the herbicides. This also applied to the cherry trees. In fact, the entire area this year has had no peaches. In 1969, the peaches were very shrivelly. The ones that were not showed cell division, 2 and 3 peach seeds inside one peaches. This shows one of the sycamore trees. Many of these have died, and again, this bright green that you see is overstimulation. It is not that it is that healthy. It stimulates the thing, and so that it keeps producing and reproducing until it is dead. And these are some of the specimens which I brought from the wilderness area, from the Superstition wilderness area, and as you can see, the actual oozing on them, and these were sent in for analyses and showed the very high content of the 2,2,4,5-T. This should have been a century plant that came from the Superstition wilderness area in Arizona. I thought this might possibly awaken some of the wilderness societies to do something about it, but it didn't seem to. You can see the orange coloring in the plant. You can see the elongated effect. That should be a prickly pear. But they had 3 sides on some of the pears, and these are totally overgrown. In the yucca, you can see the fruit and how enlarged the fruit appears to be on them. And you can see the death of the bushes. The ones that are green does not mean that they are not dying, because they are. Once this has contaminated foliage or animal tissue or human, there is no antidote that they know of. There is no way to remove it. The Los Angeles Times in November 1969 carried the story that South Vietnamese have malformed babies, birth defects, that it is under the U.S. defoliation program, and that it might well lead to malformations such as a diminution of the mental capacity. But the saddest thing of this whole story is that these chemicals are still being used, not only in Vietnam, but here in the United States of America.
One of the important activities in the headquarters office, as well as all chapters, is accepting new members. Citizens everywhere of all ages are vitally interested in the progress of the Federation. Memberships start at just $5 a year. The roster of perpetual memberships includes the names of many famous people Among them, Adelle Davis and Linda Clark, authors, and Bob Hoffman, Olympic coach and member of the President's Physical Fitness Committee. This is the office of Clinton R. Miller in Washington, D.C., legislative advocate for the National Health Federation. You know, to the average person, lobbyist means a man who represents the big business, the vested interest, somebody that's out to sell you what you don't want and you don't need. Now, in relation to consumers, to all of us as consumers, what would a lobbyist or a legislative advocate that do representing an organization that has no vested interest?
We represent the consumer. We feel that the consumer has, in the past, not recognized that vested interests have enough money to make sure that Congress hears their special point of view. We feel it's very important that the consumer organize so that his point of view is brought out. For example, there's more people today thinking that they would rather have perhaps a little worm mark on an apple than DDT on it. And this group of people have learned that in order to have that viewpoint put over to Congress, they have to have a lobbyist representing it, and that's exactly what we're doing.
Well, when I first got interested in this as an individual, I think it was back in 1958 when Gloria Swanson turned me on, when she was trying to help Congressman Delaney put over what was called the Pure Food Amendment. And that was before the scare, you know, about the cranberries and the aminotriazole as a pesticide that remained on the cranberries. And wasn't that the start of all this, really?
You're right, Betty Lee. Both Gloria Swanson and Congressman Delaney, I think, will go down in American history.
Well, Gloria Swanson was always interested in foods, and particularly in food additives, and also in the insecticides and pesticides and so forth. And she had contacted me, and we had corresponded for some time. She was invited to speak to the congressional wives here in Washington. She told me about it and said that she'd make her subject food additives. She came down, she was briefed by the council, spent some time, and the meeting of congressional wives was the largest that they have ever had up to that time. And I understand that Gloria went on for nearly 2 hours explaining this, the use of chemical additives in foodstuff, and the wives were so impressed that they spoke to their husbands, and that helped to pass it. I mean, you get the number of wives. I understand there were 750, close to 1,000 people that attended that meeting, and that, in no small way, helped to put the bill over.
Congressman, why is the Delaney Cancer Amendment important today?
The amendment certainly is always important. It's just as important today, more important, I think, because as time develops, people find more additives that they would like to add to our food supply. I don't think the American public should ever be a guinea pig for the producers of either foods or for the chemical companies. I think adequate protection should be afforded so they can, so the American public can feel assured that whatever they eat, whatever's sold on the market is not harmful for human consumption. Most people don't think about it, particularly the foods that are used daily, such as the breads and such as the drinks that the children use and many other additives.
I believe you will be glad to know, however, that thousands of members of the National Health Federation in every state have dedicated their energies, lives, and money to see the Delaney Amendment is honestly enforced by the Food and Drug Administration, and that it will be strengthened, not weakened, by future Congresses. This is one of the greatest pieces of legislation that's ever been written by Congress. You see, there was a question here of how do you stop a known harmful product that is being added to food from hurting the people that are eating the food once the pest is destroyed. So Congress came in and said, if we find that any additive is added to food which will cause cancer in man or animals, and they added or animals, then it can't be used in food at all. This was the Delaney Food Additive Amendment.
Charles Orlando Pratt of Washington, D.C., is retained by the National Health Federation as General Counsel. He has served in many illustrious capacities, among them as Senior Attorney of the Executive Offices of the President of the United States, Principal Economics Relations Officer of the United States State Department, Assistant General Counsel in the United States House of Representatives Select Committee, and has recently been appointed legal advisor to the Virginia legislature. He is in close touch with the Federation's Washington office, and with Clinton Miller often makes personal calls at the Capitol. During important sessions of Congress or committee hearings dealing with health matters, they are constant watchdogs. Kirkpatrick W. Dilling, attorney of Chicago, Illinois, walks up Randolph Street, past the building which houses the offices and laboratories of the famous Dr. Andrew Ivy. Mr. Dilling is a member of the Food and Drug Committee of the American Bar Association, is a member of the United States Supreme Court Bar, and has a long list of successes to his credit in food and drug law. His expertise in this and related fields has taken him to some 67 countries. He serves as a director of many corporations and frequently works with Attorney Pratt in furthering the Federation's goals. One of the medical advisors to the National Health Federation is Miles H. Robinson, M.D. Dr. Robinson is not only an advocate of organically grown foods, but uses no poisons on this charming Maryland farm where he resides. He has acted as a medical advisor to 2 United States senators and has done important research in nutrition in several medical universities. Dr. Robinson wrote the introduction to The Dictocrats, Our Unelected Rulers, by Omar V. Garrison. Admiral Alvin Malmstrom, U.S. Navy retired, serves as coordinator to the Washington office. Here he joins Clinton Miller and Dr. Robinson.
Dr. Robinson, the National Health Federation is frequently asked for lists of doctors who have specialized in nutrition. How did you happen to develop your special interest in nutrition?
Well, when I think back on it, I think perhaps one of the most important factors was that I've always been relatively close to farm life. My father was a farm boy. I spent my childhood summers on the farm. Since that time, we've always raised vegetables or animals. Now, on a farm, when you have a sick cow and you telephone the veterinarian, the first thing he asks you is, what have you been feeding that cow? In other words, nutrition is a basic factor in health. And this is equally true of man as well as animals. Now, when I got into medical practice, I found that there were a great many people who could not be helped by drugs or surgery. But a proper diet and proper habits of life would help them and often cure them. This is a factor which has not been sufficiently emphasized in medical school. There were 2 main reasons. One is that the medical profession has been mesmerized by the overuse of palliative drugs. A second reason is that the food industry can make higher profits on food which is not particularly nutritious. This is true of grain products, cereals, and bread particularly. And for this reason, 20 years ago, we started grinding our own grain, baking our own bread, and I made sure that my patients would have whole grain products available.
Dr. Robinson, you represented consumers on behalf of the National Health Federation at the FDA vitamin hearings. What were these vitamin hearings about?
These hearings were on proposed new regulations of the FDA, which would do several things which I felt would be harmful to the public. Number one, they would rigidly restrict the variety and potency of vitamins which could be sold over the counter to the public without a prescription. Secondly, they would forbid naming the source of a food supplement, particularly whether it was natural or synthetic. Thirdly, it would, or the regulations would prohibit in promotional literature for the vitamin supplements any mention of the fact that there is significant malnutrition in the United States, that food is effective in the treatment of disease, that processing of food affects the vitamin content, and that the quality of the soil affects the quality of the food grown on that soil. In addition, the regulations would set up some rather stupid, really, and inadequate rules for fortification of a few foods in the marketplace.
What do you think the Food and Drug Administration's real reasons were for the proposed regulations?
I think that the agency's real reasons stem from the fact that the food and drug is dominated too little by the public interest and too much by selfish private interests in the $101 billion food industry, the $12 billion medical doctor industry, and the $6 billion drug industry. You see, the food processors, their public image is hurt by people regularly buying vitamin and mineral supplements to make up for the vitamins and minerals which are not in the food which the producers sell. Organized medicine does not like people treating their symptoms with vitamins and constantly harps on the propaganda, don't make a move as to vitamins or nutrition without seeing your doctor. This is not very helpful because expert witnesses at the vitamin hearings and the panels of the White House Conference on Nutrition made it abundantly clear that the education of doctors in nutrition has been sadly neglected and is in fact deplorable. The makers of exotic drugs object to the public concentrating on vitamins or nutrition. They can make much more money with their exotic products, many of which I regard as harmful and dangerous. In short, these private interests are the ones who would benefit from the FDA regulations, not the public.
Were the hearings fairly conducted?
No, I would say they were not. One got the impression that the object was not to bring out the truth, but just to win the FDA case.
What do you think the hearings accomplished?
Well, first we have an excellent chance to block these rather stupid and harmful regulations. Secondly, we have exposed the shoddy behavior of the FDA and its ignorance in nutritional matters. It was a very expensive process. It cost hundreds of thousands of dollars to run this hearing for 2 years, almost every day. But it was infinitely worthwhile. Painful, inefficient, but the kind of thing that could only be accomplished in a democracy. We now have splendid information from prominent nutritionists around the country who gave testimony at the hearings which it would be difficult for anyone to find in medical journals or anywhere else. And we therefore have the documentation, both in the shape of this information and on the weaknesses of a government agency with which we can expect to get reforms.
Conventions are an important part of the Federation's many activities and public relations. Such conventions are open to the public and are held all over the United States and present internationally known speakers. The annual National Convention is held at the famous Ambassador Hotel in Los Angeles. The activity surrounding the many exhibits at all conventions creates added interest, as well as the banquet.
Ladies and gentlemen, a number of people in the organization have asked me how on earth we were able to get people like we have on our program with us at this convention. And I can only say this to you. If you are traveling the right path, if you are doing as best you can, if you are following the laws of nature and of God, or whatever you care to call it, good things just seem to come to you. There isn't any reason to worry. I believe that. We have some wonderful people here today, and each year the Federation grows and becomes better and accomplishes more. This is what we're seeing here today. I'm very pleased to be able to present to you two more very special guests. They're here not for glory, because heaven knows they have a heavy schedule and do not need any more recognition. They are here because they are honestly concerned about problems facing us. This next gentleman is vitally interested, has been a student of this problem for a long time, and wants to help. That's why he's here. I'm very pleased to present to you a man who knows what he's talking about, dealing with pollution, Mr. Eddie Albert.
Middle-aged guests and healthy ladies and gentlemen. You. Yeah. Well, I have been a student, I suppose, of health and prevention for some years now, and it has made my life and the life of my family much richer, much more enjoyable. It seems to me that pollution is going to be an opportunity for the beliefs in health prevention and the natural law to supplant the orthodox medical practices that exist now. This has been very difficult in the past, but I think in the studies of ecology that are bound to come forth now in the next 10 years, that is in our environment, it's got to spread to the ecology of the body. And it's easy to see in our environment the bill that we pay when we violate the laws of nature, and it can only rub off onto the information about the body.
Wonderful things about Mr. Albert and Mr. Gibson, from whom you'll speak, is the fact that they are lending their stature to a movement, and because of this they are motivating people all over our country, and we are indebted for that. After a day in the Federation office, I enjoy a good laugh, believe me. And one of the programs, and I mean this sincerely, not because he's here, but one of the programs I watch for this relief that I so much enjoy is Laugh-In. And this is... and Miss Worley and Mr. Gibson are my favorites. So, Mr. Gibson is also vitally interested in pollution and has prepared for us a very special poem, which he's going to give to you now. Mr. Henry Gibson.
Mr. Long asked me to be short. I think one of the wonderful things is that the questions that you're discussing and the talks that you've been having here at the convention are questions that you've been discussing and talking about for years, but now it's become fashionable. That's good in a way, if something's going to be done. I wanted two poems on the subject, trying to sneak the message across and laugh in. I was reminded of one when Eddie Albert was talking to you about DDT, which never is a laughing matter. And I tried to phrase problem in a way the kids would pick it up. And this was the poem that I wrote, because I figured if they nagged enough, their parents would nag legislators enough. And this was the terrible poem. DDT by Henry Gibson. I've got DDT in me. Inside me there's DDT. If you could see inside of me, then you'd see DDT. Which is all right, I guess, if you like to swallow live bugs. By Henry Gibson. I used to like fresh air when it was there. And water, I enjoyed it till we destroyed it. Each day the land's diminished. I think I'm finished.
If we sleep at the switch and we allow people to take our rights away, then we'll come to the time where people will wonder, what happened? Why has this happened to me? And in the forefront of this battle is the National Health Federation. I'm delighted to see so many wonderful people here today, because it means that the Americans are on the march. We're not going to have these collectivist moves shoved down our throats. And I wish to say this, that if it's possible for everybody in this room to back the National Health Federation, the effort which it is putting forth in Washington and nationwide to protect our liberties and our rights, by all means give this organization your support. And then, God willing, we'll win this battle, and we'll have a healthy nation instead of a sick nation as we now have. Thank you.
I'm delighted to be here and to say a few words about the marvelous National Health Federation. We are sick and tired of all pollution. We who have taught people how to eat intelligently and who have made marvelous lives for ourselves, we know what we can do. We know what good food does. And so in this free country, and sometimes not so free, we have to band together and win. We still live in the best of land with the most marvelous things. We intelligent people, instead of eating polluted food and doing all these other silly things, we eat intelligently. They call us fatties. We're not fatties. We're food enthusiasts. More power to the National Federation of Health. I beg of you, dear people, I send a check every year to the Federation. Please do the same thing. It's the only voice you have in America that fights for you.
The Holocaust from an atomic bomb is formidable, frightening, and visible. It can be seen, and so can the total devastation of its aftermath. We fear it, but you and I can do little about that type of pollution, which is already released into our atmosphere, except to hope that world leaders will find better answers soon. But what about other types of pollution, such as air, water, soil, and food, which, when totaled up, may be even greater threats? These pollutions are subtle, cumulative, and create a silent violence just as dangerous. These are things we can do something about, and which this film has briefly explored. We claim to have a higher standard of living than any other generation, and yet we are threatened with total extinction before the end of the 20th century unless we make radical changes and make them quickly. The late Dr. Alexis Carrel, author of Man the Unknown, warned more than a generation ago that man is and always will be linked to the earth from which he came, that departure from natural law always brings punishment, as sure and as silent as the command. It's human nature to react quickly only to impending crises, and to put off until tomorrow those things which require change and action. If ever there were an immediate crisis, it is now. Personal and social sacrifices are required of each and every one of us if we are to win this fight for our very existence. Public opinion is the greatest force in politics. But to be effective, your voice must be heard, and heard in unison throughout this nation. Your membership in the National Health Federation is your voice in Congress, your opportunity to let your legislators know that when it comes to pollution, you've had enough, and it's time to return to decency and common sense. This documentary has been brought to you through National Health Federation memberships and donations. Freedom is not free. We invite you to join the National Health Federation and do it today. Please join with us in this great fight for health freedom.